All right, welcome everybody to the Tuesday, October 21st meeting of the single exit multiplex housing tag. If we could take a roll call.
Roger Haringa,
I'm here.
Dan Young,
Present.
John Hall,
Present.
Joe Mayo, don't see online. Andy Lorenz, I don't see online. David Kinley let me know he wouldn't be able to join today. Jeremy Moore,
Present.
Jonathan Goldsmith, I don't see online. Robert Baglio, I'm not seeing online. Michael Wright,
Present.
thank you. Jesse Bank, I don't see online. Shweta Sinha, I'm not seeing online. Mike Messer,
Present.
thank you. David Lynham, not seeing online. Rich Geisky, I see you online.
Present.
There you go. Spencer Gardner let me know he wouldn't be able to attend. Derek Wiggle, I'm not seeing online. Richard Williams,
I'm here.
thank you. John Sue,
Here.
all right. We are sitting with just at a quorum right now.
Sorry, I muted myself. Is there anybody from the public that would like to introduce themselves? Patrick?
Yes, thank you. This is Patrick Hanks with the Building Industry Association of Washington.
Thanks, Patrick. I am not seeing any other hands up. Okay, so we will move on to agenda item number 2, review and approve the agenda. If I can have a motion to approve the agenda that is on the screen.
So moved. Messer.
Thanks, Mike.
Second, Richard Williams.
Thanks, Richard. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the agenda say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the agenda is approved. Agenda item number 3 are the minutes from the October 7th, 2025 meeting that you can see on the screen. And I will move for a approval of the minutes, and then I have a comment and I see one spelling error. But if I could get a motion to approve, and then we can, I think that's the proper way, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So moved, John Sue.
Thanks, John.
Second. Messer.
Thanks, Mike. So 2 things, the part are on the screen. Dustin, under the motion, the second sentence says poll call. I think that's supposed to be roll call.
That is correct.
That was the only comment I made, and I did want to mention to everybody that the second part of that, there was a Jonathan Goldsmith was not, we did a roll call vote. He was not asked for his vote. He brought that to our attention after the meeting. I had some conversations with him. If anything like that happens, I would ask that you raise your hand and let us know right away. If that had happened, we could have gone back and had his vote added to the voting rolls, because there was a 2-vote margin. Number one, I didn't think it would make a difference in the ending, the result of the vote. In addition, there's a couple other things, including the fact that at the end of the day, we're going to be voting for the whole package. And it will still go into, we'll look for public comment. So anyway, I wanted to just bring that to everybody's attention. If it happens again, something like that, please just raise your hand or speak up and say point of order, and we will try to make that right at the time. Any other comments or suggestions or edits?
Roger, I would notice that just now that Jonathan Goldsmith's name is misspelled. You need an H in front of the N. John.
Thank you. Thought
Unlike mine.
Thank
I
you,
thought
John.
I know, I thought I checked all of those, but I checked them up above and I didn't see it in that. So, thanks, John. Any other comments? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes have been approved. So now we get into item number 4, the multiplex housing work. Dustin, I think if you brought up the summary, the topic summary, so we can remind everybody of the items that we have outstanding. I guess I would like to remind everybody of our schedule. We have this meeting, the next meeting we have will be November, is it the 18th? Yes.
2 months.
We are skipping the meeting in 2 weeks on the 4th because Dustin and the staff have public meetings that they need to attend to. So the meeting on the 18th will be the single exit. We will then hit the multiplex housing again on December 2nd. And then hopefully we will be done by that point. So we've got another meeting on December 16th, and we could have one after that to finish up things, but we really have two meetings left to get through these, the rest of the topics. So if you bring the topics up, we see a whole list of things that are scheduled to get addressed at the October 21st meeting. If you see the copy on the column number, what, 1A, the column on the left.
Column on the left.
Yeah. A whole lot of those are egress. Interior stairs, common use space. So all of those, a whole bunch of those are egress and stair questions. And forgive me, John Sue, Angela hopped, and one other person. I forget, John, who the third person was.
It was Rich Williams.
Rich, thanks, Rich. Went through and had the goal, concepts, and issues. That document was posted, and my suggestion is that we go through the goal, concepts, and issues that was also posted, that John and that group put together, and then we can go back and revisit those, revisit the topics log, because I think we will basically knock off a bunch of those if we can go through the overall topics. Does that make sense? So, John, would you be willing to walk us through
Sure.
that document if you bring that up, Dustin?
John, would it help if you drive that, or you want me to drive it?
I probably help if you drove it. I'm in a hotel room, so
No worries. All right, here we are.
And I will leave.
You want me to go, and I'll move around.
Okay, thank you. Yes, and I will leave with apologies. I will leave my camera off for the same reason. Okay, so kind of sat down, the three of us, and discussed some of these already, and we have some recommendations included in these, but we looked at, okay, what are we trying to accomplish here? You know, the original proposal had just exterior exit balconies, exterior stairs, and there was a desire that we include interior stairs as well, and that was expressed in one of the meetings. So we wanted to go ahead. Okay, fine. We'll figure out what we need to get the interior corridors stairs and interior stairs, excuse me, in addition to the exterior. But we still want to provide adequate safety. And at this stage, that's part of the question here. What we are aiming for in that first concept is that we're going to provide the same or similar protection for the exit path as is required for in the IBC for R2 occupancies for apartments. What we want to do, or what we would suggest that we do, we've only written a little bit of the language, and we ran into some of these questions and concepts and things that we figured we should really get buy off on these before we actually start writing language, because that's going to save us a whole lot of time. Or it could save us a whole lot of time. So sorry, I should have backed up. That's the kind of what this document is about. It's exploring concepts and issues that we think we need to decide before we can actually start writing code language. So again, we're going to start with the concept that we have is we're going to require exit paths as in R2s. We're going to import the relevant sections mostly rather than pointing to the IBC section, since that was kind of an objection before. So that's part of the question here, because it is going to add quite a bit. Where possible, we said we wanted to provide prescriptive provisions with appropriate conservatism, and appropriate's going to be obviously up for discussion. But this would be much simpler. Otherwise, you start adding lots of language. If you want flexibility and precision and minimize conservatism, then you're going to increase the complexity in the code provisions. And so it kind of that's one of the concepts we would like some guidance on, is are we looking for maximum flexibility or maximum simplicity in the code provisions? And so you can write prescriptive provisions that say, okay, we're going to make it, some minimum that's appropriately conservative, and you just meet that and don't worry about it. If you want to do something different, then go to the IBC. Next concept about exiting is kind of a base concept for exiting in the building code, is that you have the units, they'll open into corridors, and corridors are protected. The corridors are going to lead you to stairs, which are even more protected, and then stairs get you out of the building. And different from the IRC, you're also getting a path to the public way. The IRC exiting provisions pretty much stop at the door, and so we are anticipating incorporating some exterior pathway elements. And the idea is that you can't decrease protection. So you can't go from a rated corridor into a protected stair and back into a non-rated corridor, or a corridor that's less protected, or some unrated room. So that's kind of again a base, very much a base concept in the IRC. The IBC. Then getting to some of the details. Again, we're saying the corridor construction and enclosed stair construction is going to be pretty much the IBC provisions. So there's going to be some fire ratings. There's going to be opening protection for stairs. So here's one of the potential simplifications, is that stairs, we're going to say all stairs are 1 hour walls and 1 hour opening protection, 1 hour doors. And we're not going to make a distinction between exterior and interior stairs. And the simplification here is that, exterior stairs, then you have to start defining how big are the openings, how exterior is exterior. And so in this way, we can also simplify some of the protection. But that's again, these are items for discussion. We're going to say for stairs, you're going to protect or set back the unprotected openings in the exterior walls from the property lines. So we don't want a fire next door blocking your exit. And there's something, we'll come back to that in just a sec. We're going to say the stairs have to have a door between them and the corridor. Again, this is a simplification, or could be viewed as a simplification, and we can talk about some of the details of that. And then we're going to allow, as the code does today, 2-story open stairs that are non-rated, but they're corridor construction. So you can have 2 stories that are open to each other and only have corridor construction. You don't need the 1-hour stairs. That's something that we came up with in our last meeting. The last meeting with Rich and Angela and me. Corridors, again, we're going to assume that they are 20-minute walls. That's pretty simple to make. That's I think it's 1/2-inch gyp. And because we are assuming that you're going to have the 13R sprinklers. If you're going to go to a 13D, if we go down that road, when we get to those sprinkler discussions or decisions, then we're going to say it really should be 1 hour. And then the doors to the corridor, so these are your unit doors, we're saying are going to be 20-minute opening protection. And the S label means that they have a smoke, they're tested for smoke, and they'll have a closer. And the idea here is that you're still trying to preserve the corridor environment. That's supposed to be what I call a pristine environment. So smoke-free as much as possible. You're going to obviously have some smoke on the fire floor because someone's got to get out the door. But once that door closes because of the self-closer, then the idea is that you don't get a lot of smoke in there, and you protect the other units from the smoke. We're maintaining the current code travel distances of 125 feet to an exit from any point in the building. And then if you have a dead end corridor, that's going to be 20 feet long. The other thing is there's a little bit of discussion. Right now we're saying, okay, you just comply with the number of exits per the IBC. And that means you can have, it starts off by saying you got 2 exits, and then you can have a single exit if you have maximum of 4 units per floor and a couple other things. This kind of bleeds into the single exit discussions, but we are not proposing to refer to the single exit appendix at this stage. If you can scroll up a little bit more, please. Dustin, thank you. I don't know which way is that, up or down. Okay, issues. So there's a couple things we ran across as we're going through this. And the first one is, well, what do we want for rise and run in the common stairs? That's the first bullet there. So the difference is that the IRC allows a much steeper stair and than the IBC. And I've got the numbers in there. Your IRC gives you a 7 3/4-inch rise maximum and a minimum of 10-inch run. The IBC requires 7 inches of no more than 7 inches of rise and at least 7 inches of run. So your treads are 11 inches long. The idea is that in the IBC, when this went in, there was a lot of discussion about trips and falls and how steeper stairs lead to more trips and falls and therefore more injuries and therefore loss of production and a whole bunch of other things. Lots and lots and lots of discussion about that. The IRC did not adopt that, but again, the idea is in the IRC is that for those stairs, they are used by the people within the units. There's still some debate about whether that is, where that's okay, but that's the way the code is. So we're going to stay with that. What we are recommending, different from the IBC and different from the IRC, is that we use the IRC rise and run, so your 7 3/4 10, for if you have a stair within the unit. And if you have the common stairs, for exiting, common path for exiting, then we're going to use the IBC rise and run because people are going to be more in a hurry and there's going to be more people on the stairs. I do have a diagram. If people are interested, I can send that to Dustin. That shows kind of the difference in length if you have a switch, your normal switchback stair. The difference in length going to a 7-inch 711 rise run stair is about 1.5 feet. So an IBC stair would be about a foot and a half longer than an IRC stair using the 7 3/4 and 10. So that's just for comparison purposes. So that was the first kind of general issue. And again, with that, our recommendation is that we split the hair as we've shown there. The second issue then was about discharging the stairs into a lobby or common use area. So, usually the stairs on the back of the building, and you end up having to get to the front of the building in order to leave the building. And the question is, are you going to allow it to go through a lobby or some other common use area? So what we are suggesting is, first of all, we need to decide what the common uses are we're allowing before we decide what spaces can open directly into a lobby and what the required fire rating is going to be. But we are suggesting that, again, contrary to the IBC, we would allow a lobby with limited use and rated fire separations from other unintended common uses. So you don't have to, set it off in a corridor or something like that. This is sort of, again, related to the discussions we've been having in the single exit group, or on the single exit appendix. How do you extend that stair to get it out of the building? And the next bullet there just says, ordinarily IBC would require an exit passageway and would not allow these other not normally occupied spaces to open into them. So this is a little bit of a reduction in the code and what the IBC would allow. What we also are suggesting, though, what we want is a rated door between the lobby and the stair. So if you do open into a lobby, you have to have a, in this case, 1 hour door. And that is again to protect the stair in case there's a fire down at the lowest level. You don't have smoke going up the stair. Let's see. The next issue was, do we need to protect openings near the exit stairs? And the idea is that if you have a fire in a unit that is then going to pour heat and smoke in the direction of the stair, do you want to have unprotected openings? If you have an exterior stair, for instance, that is completely open, you could end up pouring smoke into the stair. And so the code, the IBC, requires some protection within 10 feet. Now, if we want flexibility, again, to allow openings closer to the stairs, then we're going to have to start thinking about, okay, we have to have requirements for what constitutes an exterior stair. If we want to allow, this a little bit related to the corridor issue. So a lot of older apartments, I'm sure you've seen, you just go up the stair and you're on this landing or this extended hallway that is either open on one end or both ends, and so it's essentially you're in the exterior environment. And the question is, do we want to allow that? If you got an exterior stair, ordinarily that's probably going to be okay as long as you rate the doors opening into that stair. Again, you're trying to protect that stair more than you are the hallway or a corridor. So we're saying, okay, if we want to allow unit doors, if you want to allow unit doors within 10 feet of an unseparated exit exterior stair, then okay, but then that means we have the requirements for how open is that exterior stair. We also are suggesting that if windows within 10 feet directly expose the unprotected openings, so you have you have a window that's 90 degrees from your openings into your stair, and again, that's when your fire, if it breaks out the window, can then start affecting your stairway. So we're saying, in this case, if it's less than 180 degrees, that's pretty much your standard code. Then you're going to have to protect them within 10 feet. And let's see, we stair protection if it's 3 stories. I can't remember what that was about. Might have to come back and ask Rich and Angela about that one. I don't remember what that one was about. Okay, the next thing is that are we going to assume there's only going to be one stair? That kind of relates to, do you just assume there's one stair and all your requirements are built around that, which would then limit you to the 4 units per floor and things like that. We are assuming that yes, because most of the time that's one of the things where these are small enough in general that we think that that's going to be appropriate. It's probably going to qualify for a single stair anyway. So you're saying, sure, we'll assume that there is, and all the provisions will assume that, but there's going to be some limitations again, because if you go over 5 units or over some of the travel distance requirements, then you may need two exits. And then the idea would be then we just say, well, if you exceed these limits, then go to the IBC. The next thing is we said, the other reason for this is we think configurations of units that would require 2 stairs is pretty unlikely. You'd have to, for instance, get 5 units on the second floor and 1 on the first floor, or all 6 units on the second floor, which we think is a very unlikely configuration for these buildings. So we think we are pretty safe in assuming there's only going to be 1 stair. And then the last issue we kind of raised in this case, and we may have to raise a few others as we actually go through this, but I think these are the major ones. Do we want to allow an exterior stair to re-enter the building? So again, this is that whole idea of once you're in a protected environment, you don't go into something that's less safe. And some people could consider an exterior stair to be safer than re-entering the building. So it's safer than an interior stair in some ways because it breathes and you can't, clog it with smoke. So the question is, do we allow an exterior stair, and then can you then re-enter the building through that enclosed protected lobby as we described above? And the working group, the 3 of us, did not agree on what the answer on that one is. So we'll have to discuss that one further as a tag, I think. The rest of this document is kind of a outline of how we think this is going to be arranged. We're going to start with down the other way, please. Good. Start with a kind of a general section that talks about egress configuration, and covers you can have corridors, exterior stairs, interior stairs, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be a new section on continuity. And that's the idea, again, that goes on that once you're in the exit, you can't go back into the building and you can't reduce your protection. We'll have width requirements. It's probably, they aren't great, but are not too, what am I looking for? Anyway, they're not too bad. And so it's like 36 inches, but we'll have something about that. We'll have the travel distance requirements there. Doors, there are going to be some requirements for those doors. If you put doors on stairs, there's some force requirements, maximum force that it take to get it moving and keep it moving to open it. Some latching and some things like that. Also door widths and landings. We'll talk about means of egress illumination, require a slip resistant surface, and then the maintenance section is just about saying, look, you can't put junk in the in the exits. You got to keep them free. Corridor, then we'll go to a little bit more detail. We'll talk about corridors and exterior exit balconies. With some general requirements and then specific requirements for corridors and egress balconies. And there's some question as to whether or not we need to have an open-ended corridor, which essentially is required to be open on both ends, or if we're going to go the way the current draft is, it allowed an open corridor, a corridor be open only on one end as long as it terminated an exterior stair. And then you get into the opening protection and near the stair. Exit stairways, then we'll talk about, again, in this case, we've simplified it and combined exterior and interior stairs. So we don't need to have separate sections on them. And so both of them, they'll have the same stairway protection. That's the 1 hour rating for the shaft and 1 hour doors. We'll talk about riser height and tread depth. That's where we'll talk about, the IRC versus IBC, or common stairs versus inside the units. We'll talk about stair landings, outdoor conditions. I think there's something in the code right now about that, and I don't remember exactly what that was, what we're going to bring over. We'll talk about openings. That's, again, protecting openings near property lines and near other openings. Talk about penetrations into the stairs. So that's a real important one. We don't want to have a lot of holes poked in them. And then we'll talk about enclosures under stairways, and essentially, you can't build a storage room under the stairs and have it accessed through the stairway. So that's what that one is about. Question is, do we need something on ramps? That would be probably out in the exterior. When you're, again, trying to get to a public way, do we need some ramp slopes and things like that? We haven't decided that one yet. So that's kind of as far as we've gotten. And again, the points of discussion would be helpful to get some direction from this tag.
Thanks. Thanks, John. I have some general questions, and then I will open it up to anybody else. Kind of your first concept, same similar protection for exit passes required by the IBC. I guess kind of going back, as you went through it, John, I continued to go back to the purpose of the legislation, and that is, and you can correct me if I have this wrong, but right now you can do 2 stories under the residential code. We're wanting to go to 3 stories under the residential code. And the purpose of that is to allow construction of 3 stories with limitations that we think that will be more economical. So starting with the premise that we are using the IBC, I guess I would ask for you to kind of respond to, if I compare the 3-story under this appendix compared to the 2-story that is currently constructed under the IRC, is there I guess, why do we need to go all the way to the IBC for the exiting and
It's the same issue of exposure to more people. Once you're in, as you go higher in the building, your smoke goes up, as your heat goes up, and so we're trying to protect the extra story. We are still allowing, again, as we noted, we still would allow the 2-story condition with unprotected stairways.
Okay, so these would all be if you go to 3 stories.
Yeah, but that's when most of this stuff would kick in. Yeah.
Okay.
The corridors, might be a question we haven't gotten there yet.
Okay. And then a general comment, you've talked about, well, 2 comments. You talked about doors and stairs and ratings. Again, comparing that to the 2-story, my comment would be, if we are asking people to do something that is an upgrade compared to the 2-story, are they major cost impacts? Because again, part of the purpose is to make it more economical to do these 3-story. So some of them, it doesn't seem like it would be a huge cost one way or the other. It might be a small upcharge for added safety, and that kind of makes sense. But as we start talking about, again, comparing 2-story to 3 stories, are they large costs or not? So something to consider. And then the third item that I'll just bring up is you talked about the doors that are self-closing, have a certain force, and again,
Yeah.
being a structural engineer, I don't know a whole lot of the details. I'm aware it's in there. Do those all have to be inspected before it gets signed off? Because I don't believe that buildings under the IR and building officials on the line can correct me if I'm wrong, but if somebody builds something under the IRC, they get a permit. I don't know that it is actually inspected. And maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know.
They no, well, certainly in Seattle they inspect single family
Okay.
houses.
Okay. And is that statewide?
I
Yes.
would
Yeah.
guess that the majority of my colleagues, in Wabo would do so.
Okay.
I'll let the other building officials on the line speak as well. But
So those are kind of the ideas or concepts that came up in my mind. I wanted to get them out there on the table. I'll let others chime in here. So Richard, your hand's been up. Go ahead.
Thanks, Roger. Hey, John, feel free to jump in if to clarify anything I'm about to say. Just this is clarifying some of the points that you brought up for the two-story open stair condition. We are still limiting that to 125-foot travel distance. So that would be from the farthest point of a unit on a second story traveling down that open stair into the exit.
right,
The exit passageway issue, we are offering up a slight reduction. We're still pushing for a lobby that's rated essentially as an exit passageway. I think we're just not kind of calling that an exit passageway. But we are looking for some fire protection for that exit passageway. And for people who aren't familiar with it, we're talking about, a stair that goes down into the lobby. We're going to protect it as if it were, a fire protected pathway to the exit of the building. And then the stair protection, if 3 stories, I think we're just talking about protecting that as if it were an interior exit stairway. So 1 hour protection for a 3-story building. Couple other points, why do we need, I think what I'm looking at is why do we need this, right? Why are we trying to introduce all of these extra requirements, what some might deem as extra? This is what an apartment building looks like, and we're trying essentially to bring an apartment building into the IRC. And so I think that's kind of what the way we were looking at this. And we're asking for some more of these requirements because we're adding units, we're adding to the size and the scope of the building that you would normally find in the IRC, right? Normally it'd be two units, a duplex. And so we're adding to that. So I'll leave it there and let other people talk. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Jeremy?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of clarify that it seems like we were talking about the difference between 2-story and 3 stories, but I just kind of wanted to reiterate that we're also going to multifamily unit. So, when we're comparing what IRC is right now, we're doing 3, 4, 5, and 6-plex. So in addition to that 3rd story, and I think this gives us a lot of items to discuss on what that balance is, Roger, like you said, between simplicity and life safety that we need because we're going to multifamily and going up to that 3rd story. So a lot of good stuff to consider here, and I think they did a really good job of giving us something to start with and discuss. So thank you for all that work you guys put into that. Secondly, I'd like to say yes, we inspect all IRC stuff, Roger. So
Right.
everything from the footings to shear to framing to final, and at finals when we look at those self-closing doors. Currently in IRC, you're looking at the self-closing door between the garage and the dwelling, but contractors are used to that, and a lot of these lower rated doors here are going to be able to utilize the same type of bomber hinges instead of the steel door industrial closers. So I think they're going to be quite used to installing these doors with these bomber hinges. Yep.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for the clarification. And I wanted to reiterate your comment. Thank you, John, and the crew for putting this together. I think it's very helpful. John Hall.
Yeah, great stuff here. Just a couple questions on the thing on the page here about the stair walls with a 1 hour rating and no distinction between exterior and interior stairways. That was a little confusing, just about what that means with an exterior stair with a 1 hour rated wall. So that needs a little clarification. The other thing I was thinking about is in the scope definition, it talks about that these buildings are apartment use only with no common areas. And maybe I missed a prior discussion, but this is talking about going through lobbies and other spaces that are not described in the kind of scope of these buildings to begin with.
Yeah, John, on that last point, there's been some discussion in the last couple of meetings about some folks have land use requirements that say you have to have common space in these bike storage or whatever, right? In these buildings. And so the idea is, okay, can we accommodate that? We have not come to a conclusion on that as a tag. And so that's a little bit why we're hedging a little bit here, because we don't know what kind of uses are going to be allowed. If we're going to start allowing battery storage, then that's going to be a very different animal than if we're just having, a small lobby with a mailroom or something like that. I don't know, but that's kind of where we are, I think, as a tag. And as far as your question about the distinction between exterior and interior stairs, right now, if you have an exterior stair, I believe the openings are only required to be 45-minute, for instance. And we're just saying, look, and you have to have opening, what is that, 35 square feet and some distribution of the openings so that they don't accumulate smoke. There's a fair amount of complexity that gets into when you call it an exterior stair. And the idea was to just say, okay, let's not even deal with that. Let's not deal with the size of the openings and things like that. Let's just say everything's 1 hour, get a 1 hour door, get a corridor, get a 1 hour door, and we're done. Just again, for simplicity.
Thank you, John and John. Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to, I guess, still understand the distinction between why there's I guess, a focus on distinction between 2-story and 3-story. Like under the IRC currently, your single family home could be a 3-story single family home. Your townhouse could be a 3-story townhouse.
Mhm.
So there's no real change other than the distinction from the legislation that is saying that we want to treat similar sized buildings that can go up to 3 stories and that are limited to 3 to 6 units. So these are not even they are multifamily buildings, just like a duplex is a multifamily building, but they're very close in the same structure or in terms of the limited amount of units. You can't go beyond 6 units. So why is there a distinction between 2 and 3 stories when you can do 3 stories for your other IRC buildings?
Because your 3-story IRC buildings have a single tenant or a single owner. So you're not being exposed to all these other units. If you have 6 units in a building, it's 5 other people whose spaces you do not have control over. With the IRC building, you have, well, if you have to build a 1 over, 2-story duplex or whatever. And I don't know if that's what Roger is referring to. You can build a duplex, and again, you're only dealing with one other person down below you if you stack them. Here we're potentially stacking you on the 3rd floor with 5 others, 4, depending how you configure it, 4 people
Probably gonna
below
be
you
2
and 1
units.
next to you.
There'll probably be 2 units, 2 units, 2 units.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got 4 people down below you. You got 1 person across from the hall from you,
Mhm.
which is more exposure than you get from than you do from a normal building. And that, it's very, again, related to what we've been talking about on the single exit side too, right? How many folks are you exposed to is the question.
So I guess let me rephrase it. I guess then are you actually opening up, or I guess so open stairs for a 2-story multiplex. So if I do a multiplex that is 2 stories and I do 3 units on both of those floors, I can have an open stairwell.
Yeah, as long as you've got corridors, but yeah.
Yeah, with corridor. Okay. Okay. And so the distinction really is that a 3rd story that reduces a unit on a floor, so you're doing 2 units per floor, now all of a sudden requires you to do a rated stairwell because you've just gone to a 3rd story.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the issue. And also that 2nd story would be 125-foot travel distance limitation. But the big issue is that between that 2nd and 3rd story, the requirements for the rated stair kick in.
Yeah.
And
again,
but that's something you're bringing in here, right? Because is that something that happens in the IBC? Because currently when I look, that is between 2 and 3. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is consistent with the IBC, except we're a couple places where we've simplified or reduced.
But Marcus, also keep in mind that we're introducing the concept of allowing a shared exit into the IRC right now, which is not currently the case, right? So that's why we're bringing this IBC concepts and language trying to bring it in here.
Yeah, that was the point that I think I was a little confused on. I thought this was a added thing that was not currently in the IBC between the separation between the 2 and 3 stories. I know that currently in the IBC you can do 3 stories with a single exit currently. So that part was fine. I didn't realize that there was already a separation between 2 and 3 stories.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That 3-story stair is protected.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, thanks. Just real quick. I had made a comment about, this is what an apartment building looks like, but I, want to be careful to say that what we're really trying to do here is simplify, the requirements of the IBC in terms of the way it's presented, right? And we're not trying to provide pointers to specific section numbers of the IBC. We're really trying to lay this out in a way that allows people to go through and figure out what they have to do without necessarily always, pointing back to the IBC. And John, you might correct me on this. I don't know if we'll ultimately end up with a situation where we might have some pointers, but we're trying our best to lay this out and provide language that's more aligned with what people are used to seeing in the IRC.
Yeah, I think we're going to try not to rely on pointers as long as it doesn't get to be, 5-6 pages long.
Right.
Okay. I am curious what people think about how to proceed. I know there are 2 questions in here 2 issues that do impact how we might go forward. One is the sprinklers and one is what was the other one?
Common spaces.
Common spaces, yes. I am wondering if we kind of raise those 2 questions and have some conversations and I'm maybe make decisions on what we think moving forward. Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, off that, can I suggest maybe we start with the common spaces, just because I think when I look back, or I think we might have already settled pretty closely on the sprinkler requirement. I think we're saying that 13R is required in these buildings, or I think that's where we've been leaning towards in other past discussions. I don't know if maybe that's not been finalized yet, but that's my memory of things.
Yeah, I'm remembering the same thing. So I'm hoping we can finalize that. And yes, I was going to suggest we go to the common use spaces would you, I know you sent an email, Marcus, do you want to
Yeah,
provide your
I
thoughts
actually
on
don't.
that?
I actually don't have the email right in front of me, which might make this easier. But I did kind of um, try to do some pre-thinking on some of the stuff that I think I heard in terms of common space, and so
Dustin, do you have that email?
Yes, I'm pulling it up as we talk. If you guys want to keep it rolling, I'll
okay.
pop it
Okay.
open.
Cool. So yeah, I tried to think through some of the types of opens or common spaces, which that might have come up. So I think like bike room or like bike parking might have been one. Laundry room was one. Yeah, this is it. Thank you, Dustin. So I had kind of said, thinking about laundry room, and my initial opinion on this is just that like common laundry rooms are just not built in newer multifamily or buildings anymore. Like I live in a 320 square foot studio in my apartment building, a 54 unit building, and I have in-unit laundry, a 2016 build. So like basically it's pretty much more common practice for new buildings to just have in-unit um, laundry, and these units or these multiplex units are going to be much larger than my apartment is type of thing. So there's going to be space for that. Um, trash room could be up for consideration. I also kind of like a lot of these. I kind of think you could get away with all of these just not being shared, but I also think kind of respecting some of the thoughts from previous conversations that like trash rooms can generally be pretty small. And, for example, in the city I live in, Seattle, it kind of requires 84 square feet for 2 to 9 unit buildings. So that's going to fall into this range. And so that's not that big of a space of building type of thing. Storage room, again, my initial thought was just that these multiplex units are going to be quite large. Like I assume most of these are going to be 750, 800 square feet and more, essentially. So like you're going to have space for storage in your unit type of thing. You're not going to be living in kind of the apartment that I live in. And then bicycle room parking, again, you could consider that bicycle spaces for 6 units probably doesn't take up that much space. It's probably even less than like the 84 square feet for a trash room, especially since there's different ways of doing bike parking. So you can have racks that like hang on the wall or stuff like that, even though that's not the always the most friendly version of bike parking, but there's different ways to do that. And then there's also alternatives where you can do like a bike pram in the backyard as like an accessory structure type of thing. I still don't really know how building officials think about mail rooms or just like what is considered a mail room. If like a mailbox slot that's on a wall is considered a mail room, or if it's something more structured than that. But I'm not even sure if like you walk into a doorway of into your multiplex unit and there's mailboxes on the wall as you go up to the stair. I'm not even sure if that's really considered a mailroom, and I don't know if I don't know if the language currently in the proposal exempts or would restrict that type of thing, or by adding mailboxes there, you've added a different occupancy, and now all of a sudden there's restrictions there. I think pretty easily we could just not consider rooftop common outdoor space and just make it really simple, and just these are residential buildings that don't have common rooftop space, because that just adds another layer of protection. And then my early thought on the indoor common lounge space was just that these buildings are like, again, 3 to 6 units. It's not economical to put lounge space in buildings that small, essentially, is kind of my initial thought. You just want as much space as possible to go to rentable, leasable space, and you don't have a bigger building like the building I live in that has extra space to try to fill in type of thing. So therefore you put in a lobby or whatever the case is. So those were my initial thoughts, and these are kind of the types of common use spaces that I figure might be up for conversation. I'll let others speak now.
Thanks, Marcus. Richard?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. A couple things on in the IBC. There's a section that prohibits spaces that are not normally occupied from opening into an exit passageway. So that's kind of the road we're going down in terms of trying to limit what opens into this. If you know, if you're allowing this lobby that you go through from the stair. There, we kicked around the ideas of the mailroom, possibly the bike room, based on zoning. I agree with you. I'm not in favor of introducing the common spaces, you know, lounge space, outdoor space, because, or maybe like by lounge outdoor space, I'm thinking more like a deck or something, but I wouldn't be in favor of the common spaces because to me that introduces the concept of an occupancy, and that's what you find in the IBC. And I would probably not go that route. So I think I'm in agreement on that. But you know, we need to talk about some of these specifically these common spaces and what we might be willing to allow. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Can I just suggest we do need just to have lobby on there, right? Or are we already assuming that a lobby is a common space that is going to be part of this? So I kind of think on the list, Marcus, I think it's a great list. I think just we need to have lobby on there as well. Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, appreciate Marcus for going through all of those. I will say I disagree on the shared laundry room. I lived in an apartment building in Seattle that was built in the late 2010s, and it had a shared laundry room. So I think they are still used, especially if you have smaller dwelling unit sizes. I don't know if that will come into play with the multiplex necessarily. But I will say if the code doesn't allow something, then it for sure won't happen. If it allows for something, then it allows the market that option. But I understand with this, there's, you know, typically I don't think the IRC has a ton of shared common spaces. The Woody walk-ups are all exterior access, no interior corridors. So we'll see how the tag goes with that. And I think some of this will be a learning process as this gets first put into code and seeing kind of how the market reacts to that and then coming back and looking to make improvements from there on. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate that comment. John? Sue?
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Marcus, for putting this together. This is you know, I look at this as a pretty reasonable list. And yeah, again, if we did say no to the laundry rooms, and that's a simplification. That's kind of makes things a whole lot easier, because laundry rooms is one of the kind of common space that gets a little more iffy as far as you know fire starts go. So that would be fine. I can go either way. It's just a matter of what do we put in here and what are we allowed to open into this lobby. Roger, yeah, I mean yes, a lobby's going to be there. What is a lobby? Is it just a hallway? Is it is it a hallway with mail slots? That's kind of the big question here. And so if we say that you're not going to have an indoor common lounge space, that's showing down at the bottom there, then yeah, you pretty much have your lobby is a hallway. And it's a whole lot easier to protect that and a lot of other things if you go down that road. Kind of Marcus, in terms of your question about what's a mail room, that's a really good question. The difficulty in today's world, of course, is that if you just have the mail slots in the wall, and if we have just the hallway, and it's the code only requires a 3-foot hallway for something building of this size, and you have all your Amazon deliveries and things like that, you're going to start clogging that hallway. And that's a maintenance problem. And if you do have a fire and people need to get out, it's kind of a hazard. When I was doing plan review way back in the dark ages, we did have some discussions about that. And usually we ended up having the mail room as a separate room, just for that reason, because a lot of times the exit path did come through the quote lobby. also the fact that you don't know what's in those packages, and there's a lot of, combustibles and things like that sitting there. You kind of want that separated from your exit path. And so that's the way I certainly handled it back when I was doing actual code work. So that's kind of my opinion on that. I'm open to others, but we just, again, the issue is going to be the maintenance if it's just the mail slots in the wall.
Okay, thanks, John. Richard?
Marcus or Dustin, maybe you can scroll up, but is there a trash room on this list? Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, the one thing I would say is we can decide what we want to do with that. That would probably be up for some discussion as to whether or not we do want to allow that. It's maybe on that zoning list. But what I would say is I would be opposed to introducing the idea of a trash chute. Because I think that introduces just a number of variables that I don't think we want to try to tackle with this proposal. So if we did a trash room, I would limit it to, and make it clear that we're limiting it to just a single room and not a connected space throughout the entire building.
Thanks, Richard. John Paul?
Yeah, just thinking about this in the parallels to the single family house or the duplex that's in the IRC, in which case it wouldn't have any of these things, and therefore I would tend to say we would not want to have any of those as part of the building. That, there's a mail slot that may be out on the street or on the sidewall of the building. The trash room may be a separate thing behind the building. And it doesn't then open up the questions, bike parking then gets into that EV charging and all that sort of stuff. And just to make it simple, to say that there are no lobbies, there are no laundry rooms, there are none of these things, that it's just the units.
Okay. All very good discussion points. I've always kind of thought that we need to keep it as simple as possible. So in one way, I like that, although the question, John, of the requirements from a zoning perspective, I guess in those cities that have zoning, you would not be able to build these. You'd have to go to the IBC, right? You would not be able to build them out of the IRC.
Or you attach it in some other way.
Yeah.
Or you
Okay.
put an exterior or something like that. You have your dumpster, off in
Yeah.
the corner somewhere.
Okay. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, from a fire standpoint, I think like the trash rooms and the bicycle parking, because somebody brought up, EVs and all that. And I'm a very small jurisdiction, and I've seen the scooters that are catching on fire. The part of me though is, if it's required by land use, like this, some places require an internal, or bike parking, and that we should have something in there that they must be separate from the corridor. That's my big concern, because if something happens, we need to protect those corridors. So I'm both. I got two thoughts. One is you just eliminate them, and then they have to come up with them. But the other part too is, with spaces and everything, they may not have the space to put them outside, right, for the trash room or something like that. And the mail room, that's I think everybody's gone to the mailmen don't deliver into the buildings. They deliver them to the boxes outside. But we would have to consider with the amount of Amazon packages, all that. But my biggest concern is the trash and the bicycle parking, from a fire standpoint, and that they would definitely need to be separate from the corridors. Because I could just see, just like I think John's the one that brought up the Amazon packages. I could see the bikes and the scooters in the hallways that cause an issue. So one of the things that I would look at would be like no electrical outlets in these areas too, because that's where people are going to plug in their scooters. That would, clog up the exits. So, but anyway, it's just one of those things. I can see it both ways. It's just, if we're going to have it. We just make sure that it's in there that the trash rooms have to be separate, and same with the bicycle. So just my thoughts.
Okay, John, Sue?
Yeah, Dan, sorry, just a real quick clarification. When you say separate, do you mean that it has no doors to the corridor or is just fire separated?
Fire separated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
That helps.
Yep.
So if we can start heading in a direction, I have not heard anybody suggest that we include rooftop common outdoor spaces or indoor common lounge spaces. I don't think that anybody's in support of those. Looking at Marcus's list, the storage room, I haven't seen anybody that suggests that's important. And in fact, I know that would be one from my perspective that seems like we wouldn't want. So we have laundry room, trash room, bicycle parking, and mail that we have. I've kind of heard two proposals. One is to just say none of them are allowed. The other is, would we allow all of them as long as they're with some caveats, so that the bicycle parking is in a separate room that's separated from a fire perspective and has no outlets. Mail room, trash room, and I've heard also some laundry rooms. I don't know. What do people think? Jeremy?
Yeah, just an idea, just a thought, throwing it out here for conversation. What if we allowed them, if they were enclosed in a 1 hour fire resistant rated construction bubble, and the door access to it opened directly to the exterior of the building? Then it would have to be on ground floor, and it would open to the outside of the building. Just food for thought.
I kind of like that. John, Sue?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a possibility. Again, that's a very good simplification. I was thinking in terms of if we were going to do this, again, this goes back to that whole question. If you bring the stair down and then you bring it out through your quote lobby or your hallway there, what are we getting allowed to open into the hallway? I probably would have been okay. And this is, and it sounds sort of like Dan might be okay with it. Allowing a 1 hour, definitely a 1 hour bubble, but allowing a 1 hour door also into that corridor. Now, the difficulty is human nature, and human nature doesn't like these impediments in their way when they're going to dump their trash. And so a lot of times the doors do end up getting propped open, but that's something we can't always regulate. But so, Jeremy's idea would certainly take care of that problem. But then the question that gets to be, okay, are people really going to go outside, out in the rain, dump their trash, right? They got to go outside the building, walk around, open the door, to dump it. And so that's, if you can have it in the building, maybe you just go ahead and protect it and leave it inside the building and allow them to access it from through the building.
Okay, John Hall?
Something I'm just thinking about it. If you do allow these, would you then still have the limit on total building area of, I think we had like 8,000 square feet. So then it'd be up to the person developing to decide whether they want to build these things inside the building and take away from their rentable area, or they could build them as a separate structure or an exterior structure and not take away from their exterior buildable area.
I was curious, do we have the 8,000 square feet? I think we do, don't we? I'm kind of thinking we do, but I don't remember anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that is a good point, John, that's a good point for allowing it. So if it makes sense for somebody, but as Patrick said, kind of let the market determine what makes sense and where these things go. So I like that. Richard?
Yeah, I guess I was just gonna verify that. I was gonna go back to the source document to look for the 8,000 square feet and all that, and confirming that which document that we're working off of currently as far as the baseline document. Is that the 8/26/25 version of that document?
It's the September 23rd version.
Okay, thank you.
And that should be posted on the multiplex housing page on the IBC tag stuff.
Was that the version that was attached to the meeting minutes? Because that's the one that I opened up. Yeah, it's in.
I have to double check the meeting minute link on that one.
It is in there in the 101.1 scope, item number 3, the total floor area of the building shall not exceed 8,000 square feet. So
Yeah, I
that
don't
is
think
in
that
there.
that number has changed in any of the versions.
Okay.
we've run with.
Rich, do you have other comments?
No, my bad.
Okay. John Sue.
Yeah, it seems to me that these common spaces that we're talking about aren't going to be significantly, you know, a larger room's going to be less than 100 probably, right? A couple, you know, washer and a dryer. And you can stack them and make it even smaller. You know, the trash room's not going to be, well, I don't know what size the trash room is, I guess. 84 square feet looks like in Seattle. The bike parking, I'm not sure what the size that is. But again, I don't think they're going to be significant. You know, maybe at most, what, 500 square feet at most combined. So I don't know if we need to, you know, be too concerned about eating into net rentable, but I don't know that's, I guess that's a question for the builders.
Well, it raises a question that I have is we say total floor area of the building. Is that gross? I'm assuming that's gross square feet, but might
Yeah.
be something we want to clarify as we clean this thing up. Okay, so do we have somebody that would like to make a proposal? I don't know that I can as the chairman, but I would suggest we get something out there where we allow laundry, trash, bicycle parking and mail with a 1-hour bubble, including 1-hour doors. I think John Sue, that was your last comment,
Sure.
letting those go into the corridor since we have the 1 hour. And
Mhm.
the only outstanding question or concern I have with that is the charging for electric bikes.
Yeah.
You know, if it's one room where multi-purpose, where you're doing a couple of those things in one room, you're gonna have electric outlets. So,
Yeah, real quick, Roger, I was just more worried about the outlets in the hallway, the exit passageway.
okay.
Because
Okay.
if you have a 1 hour bubble and it's sprinklered, then you're containing it, and that's what we
Okay.
want. Yeah, no, it's just more about the hallways and seeing that, because I've seen a couple of those, and that's the scary part, is when the hallway gets blocked with the fire. So no, if it's a protected trash slash bicycle slash mail room, that's 1 hour protected. Yeah, no, that's fine with the outlets.
Okay.
Yeah.
John Sue?
Okay, so I'm going to make your motion for you, I think. Would propose that we would allow those 4 uses. There's a
4.
laundry room, storage. No,
No.
not storage. Sorry, larger room,
Laundry,
trash,
trash, bicycle parking and mail.
bicycle parking, and mail. Right.
Yeah.
To be included in the building, and those are the only uses other than residential that would be allowed within the building. With a 1 hour bubble around them, and we can figure what the details look like. But the idea is a 1 hour bubble.
Okay. That's a motion. Do I have a second?
Messer, so moved.
Mike, thanks, Mike. Any other discussion? Jeremy?
Just one discussion point. I just want to throw it out there one more time. John was correct in his saying of doors get propped open. And I'm just picturing that this door is going to be propped open most of its life, because people are delivering packages. They're trying to get their bicycles in and out of a door that's self-closing. It's self-closing and latching because it's an opening protective. And just wanted to throw it out there for a discussion item. Are people comfortable if this door is no longer self-closing and latching, or if it's propped open? Because most likely it probably will be.
John, Sue?
Yeah, Jeremy, I think the unfortunate reality is also the stair doors that can get propped open too. That's you know, you see that all over the place.
Fair
So
enough.
I'm not sure this is a whole lot different.
Marcus?
I'll just, for what it's worth, again, I live in a 4-story, 54-unit apartment building with all of these features that we're talking about, and the trash room is never propped open. I got to use double key to get into the trash room. My doors to, we have bicycle parking in the garage. If my unit was bigger, I would actually just bring my e-bike into my room. I would not park it in the garage. The garage doesn't have any charging ports to somebody else's concern as well. And I also have a detachable battery, so I charge my battery in my room anyways when it needs charging. So I don't know, somebody that lives in a multifamily building, I don't see these things propped out as often as I know it can happen, but my experience is the door's closed for a reason, and people are, we chug along with it. Yeah, it might be inconvenient, but I got to move my bike from my room back outside to the garage after filling up my tires. I just hold the door open and wiggle my way out there and all the different type of stuff. So that's, yeah, just firsthand experience is not everything. It's not data or anything like that, but yeah, just wanted to share.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Yeah, I don't think actually the trash room will get propped open that often. So, Mike?
Yeah, just food for thought out there as we're moving through, and all the comments are coming up about things being propped open, not stored properly. Just the reality is we see it in commercial buildings or R2s, R1s, it's all over the place. But something we can certainly consider as we get more into the requirements of what's essentially an R2 in the residential code is whether or not it's an inspectable occupancy. So if we write this into where it's potentially inspectable by fire code enforcement, we can use that as a mitigation as well for checking to make sure, everything's closed and correctly sprinkled. Well, the R2 has to be, or I'm sorry, the 13R system has to be inspected annually. So there's going to be some mitigation from fire code enforcement down the road we can certainly talk about.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Rich?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. With common areas, these buildings will likely fall into the maintenance portions of the fire code, and so it's going to increase the inspectable occupancies for the fire department, which is good. And we can kind of enforce some of that rated construction, self-closing doors. When we talk about 1 hour bubble on a different topic, do we want to specify that it's a 1 hour bubble with a 1 hour door? Because typically in a 1 hour bubble, you could have a lower rating on your door. And I think having a 1 hour door on that 1 hour bubble would be a good mitigating piece.
John, would that be a friendly amendment?
Sure. If we feel it's important to specify that, in general, when I think 1 hour, I think full 1 hour, but that's me. So yeah, if we think it's if we wouldn't need to specify that, that's fine with me.
And Mike is a second. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then I do think, while we're taking a vote on this, a lot of this still needs to get integrated into the actual document. So we will have another opportunity to confirm and revisit some of those details, but all right, any other comments? I think we have pretty good support for this, so I'm just going to ask for a voice vote. If we need to, we can go to a roll call vote, but can I have all those in favor of the motion say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. All right.
Aye. 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 Is there anybody opposed? Okay, the motion passes. So we have those four with a 1 hour bubble and no other common uses. Let me go to my version of the. Let's see, structural elevator, sprinkler types. So we have, I'm wondering if we've got 10 minutes until I was going to take a break. That can push one way or the other. I wonder if we want to revisit the sprinklers. We did talk about it 2 meetings ago, and I think that I don't know, Dustin, if you remember, I remember that, like Marcus, that we had talked about it and thought we had decided on 13R, but we wanted to kind of leave it open and have some additional discussions about it. And there was proposal 24 GP1 revision 5. I guess, Dustin, is there any way you can kind of help us frame the conversation a little bit? We can.
For the sprinkler stuff, so looking at our line here, we have it, yes, and we have, you just mind, I'm speaking, I guess, based on the notes here. I guess our draft has an exception. Or, no, I guess our draft doesn't have that exception in there. I do seem to recall, though, that we were talking and leaning towards 13R systems over the full 13 systems. And, beyond that, framing where we're at and to look through here, I guess, pause a little bit for Marcus to speak a little bit, and I'll keep on looking. Here's our sprinkler type.
Yeah.
We've got his 13R in here, but to check this proposal, let me pop her open.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So
Yeah.
we've all agreed that it needs to be sprinkled. So that was kind of the yes, we agree that it needs to be sprinkled. There was still a discussion about whether it could be 13R, 13D, or if it needed to be 13. I think that we have it in there as 13R. So that is that.
The proposal that is allowing a height increase for 13R systems up to 60 feet.
Okay. Can I have somebody, I think I understand that a 13R and 13 systems, because we talked about it on the single exit. Can somebody remind me what the 13D is?
It's for single family residences only.
Okay. So I think that it sounds to me like it would be 13R or 13. I don't think we would want the 13D, but Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is exactly why it was maybe still highlighted yellow to come back to in the proposal. I feel like in the last meeting, there was also discussion that that they would something around like proposal saying that townhomes that could go beyond, like could do 13D, or 13D would be allowed in other circumstances that it's currently not allowed, came up into the discussion. I don't remember the exact details. And I'll let Mike fill in, because I think maybe that triggered a memory there.
Thanks,
Yeah,
go
no,
ahead.
that was our conversation. I'll pick up on this one for you. When you're doing the townhome environment, so you've got the 5 units plus, you can stack them, and 13D is completely appropriate for those townhomes, because we look at each individual townhome as a 1 or 2 family occupancy. When we move into the multiplex like we're doing now, we start stacking those occupancies one on top of each other, we need to move to the 13R. So I want to say that's what you're referring to, or at least that was our last conversation. And if that's the case, you're nail on the head. That's exactly what we had mentioned.
Okay. So given that, can I get somebody to just make a motion that we require a 13R?
John Sew, so moved.
Thanks, John. Can I get a second?
Messer will second.
Thanks, Mike. Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay, I am going to suggest we take a break until 2:35. We're about halfway through our meeting. Dustin, I think right either during the break or right afterwards, let's go through our list here and kind of see, given the fact that we've well, I guess we didn't go, maybe we need to go back to John's egress summary and kind of wrap that up. And then we can revisit all of the issues that are outstanding, the issue log, to see what's outstanding that we maybe haven't addressed by that. So when we get back at 2:35, we will document that John sent and walk through that and see if we've covered everything, or see if that we can tie that up. So let's take a break for 10 minutes. For anybody that didn't have their sound on, the meeting is back in session. I'm going to ask Dustin to take a roll call just because this is a meeting where we're starting to take votes. So Dustin, if you can go ahead, and I am here.
All right, give me one moment. I'm priming up my roll call sheet here. All right, Roger is here. Dan Young. I see him online. I'll return. John Hall.
Present.
Thank you. Joe Mayo. Was not here earlier, sorry. Andy Lorenz was not here earlier, and I'm not seeing him online. David Kinley was not available. Jeremy Moore.
Present.
Thank you. Jonathan Goldsmith. Jonathan, I think I see you online. All right, I'll return. Robert Baglio was not here for the original roll call. I'm not seeing them online. Michael Wright.
Present.
Thank you. Jesse Bank was not here for the original roll call, and I'm not seeing online. Shweta Sinha.
Here.
Thank you. Mike Messer.
Present.
Thank you. David Lynham was not here for original, and I'm not seeing them online. Rich Geisky.
Present.
Thank you. Spencer Gardner was not available for the meeting. Derek Weigel. Derek, I see you are unmuted, but I'm not hearing you. I'll come back. Richard Williams.
I hear.
Thank you. John Sue.
Here.
Thank you. Going back, Dan Young.
Oh, there we go. Unmute, and then I'm here.
There you go. Jonathan Goldsmith.
Present.
Thank you. And with that, we are sitting pretty with a quorum.
All right, if we can pull the ad hoc tag, the document that John sent out, bring that back up. And I think we just start at the top, and I'm gonna ask people, we'll start at the top and walk through it. I was looking for John's document,
Oh, apologies.
the concepts and outline that,
Yeah, I've got it. That's just it's not open
Yeah.
up yet.
and I think we will just walk through it again. And John, actually, if you could go through it, just given our last discussion. And I am basically, I think the intent would be for us to, if you have a question or a concern about a topic, raise your hand, and we will work through that. With the idea that at the end of the day, at the end of this, we will have this document will be semi-approved, knowing that we're going to go back and both create the language at the bottom, so it needs to be moved into actual code language that we will address at the next meeting. So I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to ask for a well, we'll see if we feel like we need to have a vote if there's a controversial topic. So John, would you be willing to walk us back through now again? And
Sure. Yeah, that works. And maybe at least for our purposes in writing this, unless we hear strong objections and need to take a vote or whatever, I think we can work with not silence its consent so much as that if we don't have any objections, we'll just move with it and see what happens.
okay.
Okay, so I'm not certain if we need, do you want to go through the concept as well or just the issues?
Probably not.
I see some of the things that there are some, like the fire ratings.
Okay,
Did we not, and the sprinklers are down there in the corridor, so.
yeah. Okay, well, we can certainly start at the top. Let's see, I guess the big thing is, any strong objections to
Yeah.
providing the same or similar protection for the exit path as required, as we've been discussing. All of these are already required in the IBC at this point. We are loosening it up as far as at least the occupancies at the ground floor, opening into the pathway there.
Dustin, you stop sharing and raise your hand.
Yeah, I can't raise my hand with the share active, and
Okay.
so I was gonna suggest maybe we run with our summary topic list side by side with this one, and we can maybe start
Sure.
crossing off some lines while we do this.
Sure.
Okay, let me lower my hand and get the share reestablished.
And John, I was going to go back while he's doing that. I don't know that we resolved, you had mentioned the difference between the IRC and the IBC as far as a safe path to the public way.
Mm-hmm. That's the second bullet. Yep.
Again, thinking that right now under the IRC, we can do 4 units in duplexes. Is that correct?
What do you mean 4 units duplexes?
Well, I'm trying to compare what we can currently do in the IRC and what we're now asking to do in this with the multiplex, and confirming that we really think it's important. Because you're suggesting with the path to the public way is we are making requirements outside of the building. I think that
Yes.
said that.
Yeah. Pathway.
And I guess I'm curious again, thinking about going from the IRC with what we can currently do to now you have 6 units. I don't think that 3 floors matters one way or the other. But we're going from, I think in the IRC, we can do 4 units. And now we are going to 6. And is that critical? Is that jump critical that we start defining what happens to people after they leave the building? I'm wondering, I'm curious, raising the question.
Yeah. I don't know about the 4 units. I mean, if you're talking about townhouse units, they all each have their own exit and they get out.
Okay.
Single families, you're assuming that they're still on their own property and they get out, and again, it's only they that affect their own exit path. It's the shared, generally with these types of buildings, you're going to have a shared exit path. And getting out of, not only getting out of the building, but having to get somewhere away from the building.
Okay.
And that's the concept in the IBC. The safe path is more about if you have stairs, or in my mind, more if you have stairs or ramps. Do you start regulating those? Because right now, technically, under the IRC, they're not regulated, so you could have landscape stairs coming out of your building, and that would still be okay.
Okay, Jeremy?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I wasn't aware of any 4 plexes or 4 units allowed in the IRC. I was thinking more in terms of the IRCs for single family homes, duplexes, and then townhouses. And townhouses you can string along, but as John pointed out, they're individual single family dwellings with their own discharge and their own actual they're their own structure. But in the IRC, it doesn't say that you have to get them anywhere safe. It just has to say that you need one means of egress to get out to the yard, basically, just out of the building. And so with this multiplex, we're going 3 to 6 units. And I understand the concept of getting them a safe path to the public way, is what the IBC would call, the discharge to the public way, getting that number of people away from the building as opposed to just putting them in a yard somewhere with a bunch of landscaping. So there is a difference, just a matter if it's something we need to discuss deeper.
Okay, the four units was my mistake. I'm not used to the IRC, and actually I'm a structural engineer. I don't get into the number of units necessarily. So, and I am going to go back to the cost issue. I certainly understand now we have 6 units exiting out of one door. So getting them out makes some sense. But I also want to be cautious about adding a whole lot of costs. So if it's simple and clear, easily accommodated, if it gets too complex, I guess I will raise that question, but okay.
Yeah.
Rich.
Yeah, I guess one comment too, the egress out is one concern, obviously. But also the ingress in for fire service and medical staff is also something else to be considered when we're looking at survivability rates for cardiac arrest and the ability to kind of continue to do that work. So something we can talk about when that comes up.
Good point. Okay. So go ahead, John.
Okay. Yeah, and Roger, I'm not anticipating there being a lot of that. It just, again, saying, okay, you can't have, big, huge stairs, coming out, and your ramps can only, have to be a certain slope, can't be too
Okay.
steep. That's going to be the main thing that I envision anyway at this stage.
Okay.
Let's see. So yeah, that was kind of actually the next topic there. I don't know if we've decided on the first one, if they're it's kind of built into what we've been talking about, so maybe we can go to the next thing.
Okay.
And the concepts of increasing protection and things like that. So the increasing protection, it starts with that second bullet there. You're going to go in a corridor. You're going to go from the corridor to the stairs to get to the building, and then you get to the public way. And the idea being you're not reducing protection as you go along there.
Okay.
The corridor construction and enclosed stair construction, we're just saying, we're basically, those bullets mostly repeat what's in the IBC. So the fire protection ratings, stairs right now, if you at 3 stories, and that's kind of what I'm thinking about. There is that, if you got 2 stories, it's a little bit different. But your stairs are going to be your 1-hour walls and with 1-hour doors on them. Those doors will have closers. There's a little bit of, you can't set the closer so tight that you can't open the doors, essentially. And I think it's 15 pounds force to open them. The question a little bit is, do we want to have a difference between exterior and interior stairs? Because the exterior stairs, again, opens up a few more possibilities. I think what someone referred to as I'm not sure exactly what that refers to, but a woody walk-up, I believe, is like your open stair with your open corridor. That's the way I'm picturing it anyway. Something we saw built back in the 80s, So if we want to allow that and get some more flexibility, to have that distinction, because the requirements are a little bit different, then we can certainly do that. Again, that just adds more code. And maybe that's the first thing. Are we willing to live with the simplification there? Just say everything's 1 hour. You're going to have a interior corridor, and you could have either an open stair or an interior stair, but the requirements won't be any different.
Marcus, go ahead.
Is it sorry to mess up the share screen. Can I share a picture of what I imagine we're talking about in the exterior stairs, so that So
Yeah.
this is a common sixplex kind of picture that we use, that at least I use in my job as an urban planner, kind of trying to describe what a sixplex is for people as they think about what that means. And so yeah, this would be an exterior stair, but John, is this protected currently?
There would be some protection on the interior walls there, you know, on the back on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
The unit doors would have some kind of protection.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some question about that window to the left. You know, how does that will that need to be protected? All those windows on the 3 stories there, would those
Okay.
need to be protected because they, or is what's the word I'm like for recessing the stair into the building there, is that adequate to protect it from, you know, smoke from curling in and things like that? There'd be some discussion about that. But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like I imagine, you know, at least from my perspective, I think I would like to have this be a design option that people can choose when deciding what their multiplex looks like, or
Yeah.
or kind of a 2-story one with similar thing, outdoor type of situation, versus then your kind of whatchamacallit, your internal, oh sorry, can't get to it, your internal picture of kind of like this one in Spokane, which is a sixplex with 2 units on each side, internal stair right here. Ground level entries have doors to them, but then the rest of them go through the middle kind of interior stairwell. So
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, Marcus, can you go back to the first picture? Just one small clarification, you know, just so people get an idea.
Yeah.
So way I have it right now, or the way we're thinking about it, is that this stair itself would be allowed, but there would be a door somewhere between this and the unit doors that would then create you'd have an interior corridor.
Oh.
And then that would be the stair would be separated from the corridor. Again, max that gives you better protection for the stair. That's what we have right now. If the tag wants to go with allowing this kind of thing fully open and things like that, again, that just means we're going to add some regulations around that. And it's okay. It's just, again, it'll be
Well,
more work.
I have a couple comments. First, Marcus, thank you. That helps clarify for me a little bit what we're talking about. Second, I think that might be a trash. We were talking about an exterior trash
Yeah.
room, right? That's what we're seeing there. Interesting that it's at your front door, but not what I would expect. But and John, I hesitate. I understand the complexity issue, but I also, just from a market perspective, I think what you're seeing there, if you had protected doors, I guess I would, again, I'm not a fire person, but it seems to me like a pretty reasonable option to allow.
Yeah. So Roger, the difference would be that the unit doors would be
Yeah.
1 hour doors instead of 20-minute doors.
Yeah. And that seems like a very reasonable, 1 hour, that seems like something we should allow, in my
Okay.
opinion. Jeremy's
seeing-
thumbs, I'm seeing a few thumbs up there, so,
Okay, I will take appropriate notes.
okay. Thank you. And then Dustin, you can pull up your split screen again.
Okay, so that kind of takes care of the first bullet under stairs. That means that one gets struck through, because there will be a distinction then between the two.
Okay.
Let's see. Then the next bullet below that talks about protecting or setting them back from unprotected openings in the exterior wall. So if people can remember the picture that Marcus had up there, and I mentioned the windows to the left of the stair, those are the code right now. The IBC would require those to be protected because they're within 10 feet of the stair. And the idea being, again, that if you have a fire in one of the units and it breaks out the window, particularly the one on the lowest story, your heat and smoke is going to go upward, and there's the potential for contaminating your one stair. Even though it's open, you still, can contaminate it. So the idea is that the code requires that anything within 10 feet essentially be protected. And there are ways kind of around that. You can build what we call wing walls and increase that length, that distance. There's a question a little bit about how many corners will the smoke go around. Depends which way the wind's blowing, but there are ways to lengthen that, make that 10 feet without doing more. It just, people don't like the look of that. They build, like I say, wing walls or something like that.
And John,
Yep.
when you say protected, that is a different window?
Yes, it is. That would be, so the choice is to either protect the opening on the stair or protect the opening close to it.
Okay.
And yes, that is a 45-minute rated window, which is not cheap.
Okay.
But again, it's providing that protection. I don't know what the fire guys think, but sometimes there are ways to try to protect the glass, so at least give you a little bit more with the sprinklers. But that's a whole kind of can of worms I think you get into. And the other thing is to set them back from property lines. Again, if you're right up against it right now, the code says you have to be 10 feet away from the property line. If it's a front property line, you're going to be right on the property line, because you got the whole street in front of you. But if it's a side, if it opens into a side yard, that stair has to be 10 feet back, because you don't want the fire from across the way, blocking your exit too, right? That's what they call fire separation distance. So that's one of the things that's somewhat up for debate, but again, we think is reasonable if you're going to allow an open stair like that open into the side yard. Let's see, we're going to get rid of the third bullet there based on what we just talked about. If you can allow that exterior stair without a door, then we can delete the third bullet there. That's the stairs are quite, that one there.
Yeah.
You can strike
John,
through that.
when you're talking about the protected window, I go back, was thinking about the picture that Marcus put up. It makes some sense to me to protect that. At least in the code language. I mean, we can continue to have conversations about it, but if you're going to take this and put this language into the bullet item or the code language down below, I like requiring that protection.
Okay, we can start with that and see where we go.
Yeah, thinking even about the cost question, you're saving a fair amount of cost by allowing to have that open stair by not enclosing it. So I think, part of that is all right, you have to protect the window even if, so.
Yeah, or you move it 10 feet away, which
Yes, right.
might be difficult to do in some cases, but
Yeah, okay. Rich?
Just a quick question on that open stairs that was shown in the photo. Is there a stairwell when we get to that third story? Is there a rating for that stair enclosure between the open stair, and the units? Are those walls rated, or is it just the doors?
No, the walls are rated. You can't. Yeah, they're all 1 hour.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can't. Not much point in putting in protected openings if you don't have rated walls. and 1 hour rating rated walls is very standard construction, right? Your 5/8 type X chipboard on both sides of the wall. So
Yep, that was my understanding as well. I just want to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding or misremembering that.
Yep. Okay. The next question then or point here is about the corridors. The code allows you to have a 20-minute wall, actually, if we're doing the 13R sprinklers. Actually, so that Rich Geisky, we'd have to think about if it's not, if the corridor, if you have that open corridor that's open to that open stair, like Marcus was showing, there might have to be some kind of exception about that, but or some way to say that those are actually 1 hour walls. But the corridor, if you have an enclosed corridor, interior corridor, then those are 20-minute walls. And 20-minute opening protection. And they have to have gaskets and some other things to make it smoke tight. And since we're assuming they've got the 13R sprinklers, then that's going to be allowed. That's allowed outright in the code.
Ken?
I guess my question is, if that's an open stair, I believe 13R doesn't require the sprinklers
In the stair.
in the stair.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure everybody understands that when you're having that 13R sprinkler system, there's no sprinklers in that stairwell whatsoever. So I didn't know if somebody wanted to be looking at providing a dry sidewall head above each door.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, so first off, great point to Ken, but that would be the intent, is to put in the dry pipe head out in the corridor, or at least that would be my suggestion, is to have it.
Is that for either of you, is that in the 13R standard, or is that just something we'd be doing additionally?
You know, funny enough, I was under the assumption, I go back and look, that is part of the 13R standard. I know when I'm doing 13Rs, we do have dry pipe heads already in our corridors for our apartment buildings. So I'm gonna have to rely on Ken if they're doing something a little bit different in Seattle, or if this is just because the size of the building.
No,
Typically, and I know one thing that is different about what we're doing with the multiplex is typically sprinklers aren't required until you hit 3 stories and 16 units. Respectively. So for that, I'll have to throw it back to Ken to see what they're doing.
so 13R, when we're talking about providing sprinkler coverage for balconies, if we want to consider this a balcony, if the balcony is part of the means of egress, then there is a sprinkler requirement. So I think that's in the 13R language for balconies. It's just, would we consider this a balcony, and then it leads to the stairwell, so then it needs to be protected. It's kind of just the interpretation of it. So it's whatever you want to do. I'll hold my my reservations about the 13R system to begin with, and the cost of putting that in. But I think that, I don't know if anybody has really looked recently at the Vancouver BC document that was just put out September of this year regarding modifications to 13R systems to make, or multiplexes, to make these a little bit more affordable. So I'm just hoping that somebody's already looked at that before you guys went with your everything's a 13R.
Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to follow up on Ken's thing about 13R, that, yeah, it does require that sprinkler protection be provided for corridors and balconies that are part of a means of egress.
Okay.
Okay, I've made some notes on that in for my purposes anyway. So that would probably, we'll have to figure out how we make that clear. Generally, the sprinkler stuff doesn't appear in the exiting section, so that might be something when we do the the part that says you're going to use a 13R. Maybe it should get inserted there. And Ken, to your question about have we seen what Vancouver is doing, I have not seen it myself, so that'd be something good to know.
I'll email it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan?
So if the 13R system requires it in the NFPA, why would we need to restate the installation standards in the code? Wouldn't it already be in there that it has to be done?
Sure, I mean, that's a possibility. It depends, it depends if we want to head off an interpretation issue about, so again, thinking about that picture that Marcus threw up there, is that a corridor? Is it a balcony? Is it something else between the unit doors and that stair? Or is that all part of the exterior stair? Someone could certainly argue that, right? It's all open, so all of that is you rate that as the exterior stair, you rate the doors as if it were all part of the exterior stair. And so maybe I'll ask the question of the fire guys. If that's all the stair, then do you still get the dry head
The
over the unit
13R
doors?
13R specifically says stairs don't have to be sprinklered. So open stairs don't have to be sprinklered. But it does then reference about balconies that are part of the means of egress do need to be sprinkled.
Yeah, so we might have to put something in to clarify that this is what we're, yeah, I'm not sure how, because in my work before, that would have been all part of the exterior stair. So okay, we'll have to think about that then, how we approach that. Okay, let's see. So that whole line about the if we go back to the document, the whole line about corridors is assuming also these are interior corridors. There are different requirements for exterior exit balconies, and so we'll have to look at those. Travel distances, again, this is standard code. You got 125 feet from the furthest point in your unit until you get to an exit. As Rich pointed out, if you have the 2-story open stair, that's until you actually hit the ground. If that stair is not rated. So until you actually leave the building, that's where you measure 125 feet. Your dead ends, again, your corridors, if you're going to have, again, picture that picture that Marcus showed. If those corridors or dead ends go left and right from that stair, those can be a maximum of 20 feet. Let's see, and then we're assuming, the next bullet about complying with the number of exits. If we answer the question that we're going to assume that everything's a single stair, then we're pretty much saying that sub bullet there that we're going to have maximum of 4 units per floor, and we got to double check, but I think all the requirements the rest of the requirements are already taken care of, as long as you've got the 125 feet to the exit, and I can't remember if there's an occupant load limit. I think it's just the number of units. Okay. Not hearing or seeing any questions.
Derek.
Oh.
Derek, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I think we were having trouble hearing him before.
You're off mute, but we can't hear you.
All right, try that. Can you
There
hear
you go.
I
got you.
setting. Haven't talked enough in the meeting, I guess. Oh, I just gave me some clarity on the max 4 units. Was there a thought, or am I confusing this meeting with the other meeting where Marcus had said, hey, instead of doing max 4, what if we did 6, but you can't go up as high?
That was the single exit.
Okay.
And it was, if we limited it to either 20 or 24 units, you could do a four-story with 5 units on a floor.
Yep.
So I think that was a single exit.
Okay. Yep. All right. That's just clarifying. Thanks.
Mike, go ahead.
Hey, sorry to circle back to the sprinklers, but I was just looking everything up. So from what Kid said, if you go to NFPA 13R, and I'm looking at the 22 edition, since that's what would be codified for our 2024 building code, 6.6.5 does exempt stairs, but if you go into the enhanced contents of the NFPA commentary, it gives some pretty clear direction on what is open and what is not. And it does say protection of open and exterior spaces require a type of system that is oh, I'm sorry, wrong section. All right, here we go. Since NFPA 13R is concerned with providing life safety by way of affordable installations, open and exterior areas are allowed to remain unprotected while still providing an acceptable degree of building protection. In 2019, the committee did add that for it to be open and exterior, they have to be separated from the corridor and stairwell. So if you remember, John had just mentioned about creating a separated exit corridor from the stairwell, and I think we just went to the 1 hour doors as an exception. By doing away with that stairwell, these would not be considered to be exit per the NFPA commentary. Therefore, your exterior or sprinklers would be required in those stairwells. And that's something, Dustin, I can send you the citations and send it out to the group if you like.
Yes, please.
Thanks, Mike. I still think that it's most of the support was behind having that sprinkler above the door. So John, I'll let you kind of address that and work that into the next.
Yeah, we'll see.
The next version. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. So the next issue to talk about, I think, is then the stair rise and run. And I guess the question is, are people okay with what we are proposing here? Again, I'm sorry, I forgot to send Dustin the diagram I had that kind of laid out how what these would look like. But again, the difference in length going from to a more shallow stair as opposed to the IRC steep stair is 1.5 feet. And the question is whether or not people think that's significant.
I am in support of what you've got, allowing the steeper stair in the units because you'll get used to it. You know what your stair is, but a common stair, have the 7-Eleven.
Yeah, and that's for your visitors and everybody else.
Yeah,
and also, in a panic situation, it's better to have a shallower stair.
I'm the opposite. But my opposite thought is not super strong, so I'm fine going either way. But my thought is, hey, you're going to someone's house, you're expecting house style stairs. At least when I've gone to apartment complexes, and then you're running up the stairs, or you're going to, your head automatically clicks, oh, I'm going to someone's house. It thinks residential. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not going up very fast. So, oh, these are weird steps. So I'm like, just leave them at 7 3/4, 10. But that's my thought.
what do other people? Is this something that we want to get it out there and put a vote to, so that John doesn't have to go through and then we add a bunch of language and then we go back? Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in support of the way they have it here on the document, where the common stairs are the IBC rise and run. With the increased occupant load using it, that it's going to be the main discharge, the only exit in an event. I'm in favor of the way it is with the IBC stairs for the means of egress for all units, but having the IRC stairs in the unit. And it does reflect the way the wording is in the, for R2s in the building code. But,
yeah. Again, back to my comment, it wasn't a deal killer. It's just more of a preference. Like if I was building, I'd want the IRC ones, but yeah, it's not a big enough deal to.
Okay. I also Derek, you're thinking about if you're coming to visit somebody, but if I'm a fireman coming to a multi-family, I'm expecting a more commercial stair and I'm carrying stuff up. So,
yep.
Okay.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
I'm going to consider that one okay. Let's see. Let me make my notes here. Okay, the next one was allowing the stairs discharge into lobby, and I think that we've already talked about that. Not the what we're talking about is, well, it sort of looks like a lobby, but really it's just more of a hallway, and the common use areas are going to be extremely limited. It sounds like, so I think our suggestion again in that first bullet where it says lobby okay. With limited use and rated fire separation. That's essentially what we already decided on the common use stuff.
Okay.
And so I think we're okay. We're done with that one. Protecting openings near the exit stairs. I think that we've again just talked about that earlier, and so we'll write it in as yes, you will be protecting openings. But since we're allowing the exterior stairways, then the open stairways, then there'll be a little bit more in there. I think we can safely assume there's only going to be one stair in these buildings, as long as you stay within the limits of pretty much and one of you other building guys is going to help me. I think it's the table only. It's the only limitations are in the travel distance, like 125 feet. As long as you can meet that, then you can stick with the single stair.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to mark that as a yes. We're going to assume that for now. And then, okay, this is a little bit different one. And again, because our little work group didn't come to agreement on it. And so take that exterior stair that you had in Marcus's building and throw it on the back of the building. So the landlocked side. And now you have to get from that stair to the front of the building. If it's open, are we going to allow it to re-enter the building as long as that passageway from the front to the back is appropriately protected, but you might still have your bike room and your trash room opening into that, or in your laundry, whatever else. Is that okay? Some people think that, again, the exterior stair, you're out in the open. In general principle, we don't allow people once they're outside the building to re-enter the building. But technically, according to the code, the exterior stair is an exit, and so you're going from exit into another piece of the exit. Then you don't hit what we call the exit discharge until you get to the front of the building. That's a kind of interpretation issue. And so the question is, do we want to allow this to happen or not?
Jeremy?
Yeah, just a comment. I think if we allow it to happen, it is going down the road of not simplifying it, which was the intent of putting this in the IRC. Then you're trying to interpret horizontal exits and fire barrier continuity in the IRC, and trying to use that terminology from the IBC in this. And I just think it complicates things, and I am a proponent of the old adage that John brought up, the whole, once you have them out of the building, you try not to put them back in the building again. So I think it just complicates things, but that's just my thought.
Jeremy, the picture would be that you're going from an exterior exit stair into an exit passageway. Would that be allowed?
Into an exit passageway, so you'd have to have the integrity then of the 1 hour fire resistant rated construction, all the opening protectives till they get out to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what we've got right now, or where we're headed right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's doable, that's for sure. Yep.
I don't have an opinion. I can kind of see both. My temptation is to keep it simple and not allow it. And I kind of wondering if I have a small site like that I'm gonna use, make a multiplex, are we really restricting somebody, or can they design it without allowing them to re-enter the building?
Yeah, I mean, and the question is, Roger, I think that configuration would be somewhat unlikely because you're
Yeah.
eating up all that space in the, downstairs anyway. And most people would probably going to put the stair on the front of the building, again,
Yeah.
just to save space and everything else. So I think it's semi unlikely, but I wanted to throw it out there just, as a possibility.
Well, my personal opinion would be to leave it so that you don't
Okay.
you don't want them to go through. I want to make sure I'm not getting double negatives there, but
Yeah.
um,
Don't
but
re-enter
that's-
the building.
Yeah, that's my personal opinion, but okay. So, John, you've got your direction. You're going to take this and kind of fill out the sections below, you and your work group.
Yep.
And a reminder, it'll be December 4th or something like that when our meeting is after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
I would ask if you've got it, certainly get it to Dustin. We'll distribute so people can take a look at it. But
Sure.
so Dustin, let's go through the document on the right and just see if there's anything in there that we don't feel like we've addressed.
So all this stuff, oh, here, let me make it larger.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
All right, so anything that we don't have marked as yellow, we are identifying as kind of resolved. Coming in for the stuff that we had scheduled for today on the 21st, is primarily means of egress. With the discussion today, my notes might update that, we got some, we're looking at having common egress paths going, so we would need some language update, and that's, I think everybody's got their, we don't need to make any motions or direct anybody to do anything. I think John and that work group, Angela and Rich, are capable of providing some updated language for us to discuss in the future. So most of this egress is on its way to being resolved, but that'll be our next multiplex meeting. We talk about that.
Dustin, can I just clarify for myself? So we're showing 103.1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, well,
Are those the numbers that John should be using?
yes,
that
that's
was
the number. So when he comes back with at the bottom of this document, he's got the framework for where he thinks things are going to go.
Okay.
And there's some new sections that aren't included in our baseline document that they'll be coming back with, and they'll adjust the numbers appropriately.
Okay. Thank you.
We haven't finalized our definition of multiplex on this one. I think that probably might be something that gets finalized as we round out everything that we're discussing with below the multiplex appendix topics. We've got more egress components, interior stairs or corridors. We've been talking about dwelling unit separation. We don't have that finalized, but we talked about the common use areas. And we talked about so the motion made was that common use areas are allowed in the specific types, enclosed with a 1 hour encapsulation. And we clarified further that the 1 hour door would be required there. So we could update this one today. Does that track with what everybody's remembers from today's conversation, that the dwelling unit separation is more for separation from the common use areas versus separation from dwelling unit to dwelling unit?
There will be dwelling unit to dwelling unit. Are those not already?
Well, our note on here has separation from common use areas. The separation between dwelling units is typically an hour separation.
Yeah, okay.
Marcus?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, Dustin, I think that's where we're at. I think there's language in the current proposal around the separation between unit, and I think this was the thing we need to wrap back around to based off of the earlier discussion. So sounds like there's also 1 hour fire rated protection between dwelling unit and common use areas if they're next to each other.
Yeah, and you're correct. We do have that in there. It's in section 102.1 on this one. And I guess, do we need to update some language for the common use areas in here within 102.1, or is that something we could target somewhere else?
I think that it needs to be in there. I know that the one right above that, the common use spaces we just finished today.
Yep.
Or made a decision, but I think that language does need to get worked into the proposal.
Okay, so it'd be like 101.1 number 2 would likely get changed to from saying use of any portion of the building is limited to residential apartment use only with no common use areas. We could work that into there for placing these specific types of common use areas in there.
Yeah.
So
John, go ahead.
Yeah. So the question is, who's we? Going to work that in. But whoever does, I would suggest you could just add that in as an exception if we want to do that. You could put an exception for
Okay.
laundry rooms and all this stuff separated by 1 hour.
okay.
Well, John, my intention, and I don't remember who created the document. We had somebody do the draft of the
This one
this
came
is-
in from Wabo, and we've been running with that one and making small modifications.
Well,
Okay.
from basically Jonathan and Angela had the first crack at it.
Okay.
Yep.
I think, not volunteering them, but I think that we need to have somebody then take all of these decisions from this matrix and take a pass through the whole appendix. And then we will need to do a final review of the whole appendix. That's my intention here. The last meeting that we have when we are ready to say, okay, here we're ready to pass this on. It's going to be we will have to have somebody have gone through and update the whole document, the whole appendix document. Marcus.
And John, your suggestion was to basically do an exception under 102.1, or you just made a
Sorry, under that's the sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth between documents. Just a second,
Yeah.
let me find it. Baseline draft. In 101.1, the scope item 2 says you're limited to
Gotcha.
residential use only with no
Yeah.
common use areas. Instead of, I mean, there's a couple ways you can do it. You could try to write it into positive language in number 2, or just write it as an exception to number 2.
Okay.
So I guess
I might Justin, I might try attempting drafting something and I can send it to you and you guys can enter it in, if anything, if nobody else is gonna jump on it.
that would be very helpful. Thank you, Marcus. Okay. Sprinkler types we resolved here today. EV charging requirements. Should we point to the IBC or let the IRC baseline requirements drive that, or potentially a separate requirement for the appendix?
So I actually, we have the EV charging, we have elevators, braced wall panels / structural questions, and then fire separation distances if not attached are the things that are on our list yet. So let's go ahead. The EV charging, I'm not sure that I have pulled that up for a while. What are the requirements in the IRC? Do you know, Dustin?
In the IRC, if there is a garage provided, a circuit is required to be installed in there for charging apparatus to be installed. And I guess my question for those who are more familiar with multiplexes as a concept, do they typically have an attached garage? I mean, is that something that you might see in these? I don't think we're anticipating that. And is there a need for potential on-site EV charging to make us compliant with the other statutes that any new building constructed shall provide for EV charging?
John, go ahead.
We are not envisioning a common garage underneath these buildings. That's part of that no other uses.
Yep.
So it depends if we're gonna have, if these are gonna have, if they're in Seattle, will they require parking at all? But if there's a parking lot or carports or whatever, a lot of places, these old, if you have multiple on a site, they might have a parking lot and carport. So do you require it for that, I think is the question.
Marcus, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think part of the discussion that we had last time this came up, I think Patrick kind of explained a good example where, like, if you refer back to the IBC, the IBC bases it off percentages and like has different tiers or different types of EV infrastructure. And I think for most IBC buildings it's like 10%, but 10% of, of a building like this is actually going to be at least 2 units, which is 33% type of thing. So if like you're sending it to the IBC, these multiplex buildings with from a percentage basis are going to be requiring more EV infrastructure than typical IBC buildings, I think is part of the discussion. Whereas if it was just a IRC, if it was just a IRC standards, you're not requiring that much EV thing. And I think that's where Dustin brought up the thing of, are we in alignment with other kind of RCWs that are kind of looking to increase the amount of EV parking infrastructure if parking is added. So I think that was part of the framing of the question, or kind of why we returned back to this.
John Hall.
Yeah, just thinking that parking would be under the zoning code, and so I would say that we should say if you're providing parking, then you provide a certain percentage of the parking that you're providing as EV. But if they're not required to provide any parking, they wouldn't be required to provide any EV either.
Okay. I agree with that. So does Jonathan Goldsmith. I am still trying to understand what all of this will be under the residential code and or zoning unless we direct them to the requirements in the building code. So again, I'm not quite sure what the IRC says, if anything, other than somewhere along the lines, if you have a garage, you have to do it. Is it in that section, Dustin?
So this is the only RCW that's really affecting our EV charging requirements in the building codes, and this is the I think the where parking is provided part is where we get most of our stuff for the commercial code, and then I'd have to make sure I'm reading this appropriately for the residential portion of it, like where that language is kind of pointed to in here. The legislation is asking us to bring this into the residential code. I would say that the spirit would probably require or, point towards the residential provision for EV charging. And they're not going to put attached carports or garages on these structures. And so I'm not sure if we're running afoul of anything if we don't have a provision here that would bring some EV requirements to these buildings.
My question is in number one, it says, EV is adopted by the state building code. Oh. National, international standards. Okay, Patrick, can you help us out?
Maybe we'll see. Might get more confused. I was gonna offer if I can share my screen, I can share my little EV charging calculator to show what this would look like under the IBC rules. Okay. Can you all see?
Yes.
Yes.
So the current requirements are 10% charging stations or 10% chargers. 25% have to be basically ready to install a charger. And then 10% have to just be conduit. The updated rules for 2024 will remain 10% for the chargers. The ready for the chargers will go down to 10%, but the conduit will go up to 40%. So for these multiplex, I just assumed that we're talking about 6 units. And then I have 3 different ratio options. So you can have a 1-to-1 of dwelling units to parking spaces, 1.5, or then 2. In some cases, I was thinking if you're have a lot of like 2-bedroom units in there, you might want 2 parking spaces per unit in case there's roommates or families or things. So because you have to calculate each category separately and then add up and round up to the nearest whole number, then add up all those spaces together, it can end up being a larger effective percentage than what you might think just adding up those percentages by themselves. So, for example, if you compare it to EV parking spaces to dwelling units, when you get up that 2-to-1 ratio, you can get up to where there's more than one, there's going to be effectively more than one parking space per dwelling unit with some type of EV charging infrastructure. For a minimum requirement, this can be, I think, a little excessive for buildings with a small number of dwelling units. If all of that infrastructure was totally utilized and you assumed that you were going to charge only 1 car per day, so typically, let's just say people are going to come home at night and charge, and then you tried to divide that up per the number of dwelling units. At the high end, you would get like over 10 nights per week of charging per dwelling unit. So I think that if the capacity was totally utilized, you can go down to a smaller percentage, assuming that people are coordinating and sharing. Hey, you get it on Monday and Wednesday nights, I get it on Tuesday, Thursday, whatnot. It's not like every person has to have a charger every single night. And then you can get into the electrical load capacity, but that kind of hopefully helps people understand a little bit about how that scales up when you can have more parking spaces than dwelling units. Did I help anything, or are people more confused?
Well, I don't know. I understand I don't know, Patrick. I mean, I don't think there is a huge interest or support to push us into the IBC EV charging requirements. Given that I think that it is currently would be under the IRC, that's our direction is to build these under the IRC. So I'm continuing to try to understand what are the requirements, just given the IRC.
I would say that section 3 or here is where the IRC language comes from.
You're not sharing now.
Oh, I'm sorry. One moment. But section 3, I think, is where the IRC language is the genesis of that. So for all types of residential and commercial buildings to support the anticipated levels of zero emission vehicles. So, you know, for the IRC, they have to have the garage or the carport to be required to install the the infrastructure there for the EV charging. And if we're not going to have that, if multiplex buildings are going in there, I think that maybe one per multiplex building might be the more than minimum requirements that they're talking about in this section. But you know, I would leave that open to this group. I'm not advocating for 1 or 0 or what the just kind of trying to characterize where I believe the genesis of these requirements are coming from.
So if parking is provided and we're saying that it will not be attached or underneath or anything, then you have to provide one. Seems reasonable to me, but I'm again not sure. So Patrick, okay, Richard?
Yeah, I was looking for a way to bring this up, and this is about accessibility. Kind of related to this, you know, with any accessibility requirements for parking or EV parking. Currently, we've gone down the road so far of just pointing to R2 occupancy requirements for our current proposal, and that's to say that currently in the IRC, for accessibility requirements, you have to comply with essentially R3 requirements, right? So we've changed it to R2 requirements so we don't lose like the type A units, and we keep it as close to apartment unit requirements as possible. And I think I think it may be of benefit for me to come up with some sort of a list, try to be as succinct with that list as possible of some of those R2 requirements so that we don't just throw people out into the IBC. And again, I mean, you know, I think we're doing the same thing with everything else here. And I think to do otherwise with the accessibility requirements would be, could be an issue, right? You know, you're just going to say, oh, yeah, treat this building as an R2 occupancy for accessibility. Well, people may not know what that means. So
you're suggesting including doing that for both the accessibility and the EV charging.
Well, Roger, yeah, I'd start with accessibility and then see where we get from there. I mean, you could dovetail fairly easily with the EV charging, but I will, if people are amenable to that, I will be open to providing that by next meeting, prior to that even, so I can get it into you guys and you can see what I'm talking about. But I'm throwing that out there as a thing. I was hoping to have something sooner, but it's just things have been kind of gotten a little sideways with timing and whatnot with other commitments. So
yeah. Well, I will take you up on that, Richard. I still have that outstanding in my have we appropriately included the accessibility or not? I mean, obviously we need to meet ADA and so I think having you do that would be a great idea. At least it's something pulling all of those topics together so we can discuss them similar to what we're doing currently with the egress questions. So Jeremy?
Yeah, with regards to EV, it just seems like the legislation was pointing us to put this in the IRC. And if we point towards EV requirements in the IRC, essentially, we're not in reality going to get any because of the way R309.6.1 is worded, where it says it's going to have to be provided EV infrastructure with attached private garages and attached private carports. So realistically, these buildings aren't going to be built with attached carports or garages. So if we point to the IRC requirements, we're essentially not going to get any EV infrastructure, but it does make it more affordable, which is what everyone's been talking about, you know, all along. But does it conflict with this RCW intent? So I like the affordability of pointing to the IRC, but somebody brought up a commonsensical alternate was, when parking is provided, not less than one. Maybe that's something that people can discuss and visit about, but I like the idea of pointing towards the IRC and then deciding if we need an exception for just not less than one. But if we could stay out of the IBC, on EV, I think it would be a lot more affordable.
I agree with both of those comments. Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, the IRC requirements are really based around the assumption that most buildings under that code are going to have attached garages, and if they don't, they're probably not going to have parking on site. And so that requirement to just have one sort of plug for that works for that code as it is right now. While I agree it would be a lower cost option to just have this point there, the likelihood of Multiplex having an attached garage is probably not as likely as a single family home. But at the same time, the IBC requirements, as I've pointed out, would be most likely a little burdensome and add a lot of cost, which would kind of undermine the intent of having this lower cost option for multifamily units under residential. So one thing I can offer to the tag is I helped write the new EV charging stuff for the IBC coming up in the 2024 code, and on the residential tag I helped write the update to those requirements. I can offer you some suggested language custom for this specific building type that tries to blend those two together in a way that meets the minimum requirements of the law while not going as high cost as the IBC and not sort of having that kind of loophole of just pointing to the IRC if the tag would be amenable to that.
I certainly would, Patrick. I mean, I think that's been my point all along, is I don't think we want to go to the IBC. I think that will be overkill, but I'm kind of concerned if we don't end up with at least the exception that was just mentioned, that if provided, you need to, one minimum or something. So if you could put that together and we could address it at the next meeting, that would be wonderful. In my mind, if everybody's agreeable to that. Marcus, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, before Patrick came up with that idea, I was just going to say it sounds like this is highlighting, we're adding multiplexes into the IRC, and the IRC code and the EV standards haven't caught up to that. So it sounds like whether we add it in during this period or not, it seems like this is something that when the next update cycle happens, that they'll have to just look at and make sure that they're capturing also multiplexes as well. Regardless if it's added in this appendix right now, it might just be an update for the next cycle for EV charging in the IRC type of thing.
I think we need to address it in our first writing. I don't want to push it on 3 years, but I think that it does need to be reasonable, and I completely agree where the intent is to make it cost effective, but I also don't want to put us in conflict with this RCW. So Patrick, if you can take your best shot at it, that would be wonderful.
Sure, I can do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Patrick.
So the next one is the elevators. Do we think we can get through that in 12 minutes? I don't know that the structural we can. There's a couple of things that we need to hit on structure, but elevator size and standard. And I did have an email from somebody. I gotta find it here. Jonathan, you had emailed Dustin and I about we had 3 options that we pulled together, and we were going to ask, you were not at the meeting on the September 23rd. At the meeting on September 3rd, we had 3 options. Dustin, can you pull up? Jonathan's reply was on October 1st, 3:20 p.m.
Yes, give me one moment.
and down below, you had emailed him and said, here, we came up with 3 options. Jonathan suggested option 1, which I guess I think that this addresses both of those items in our list.
You said it came in on September 21st?
October 1st is when
Oh,
he
October 1st. I'm sorry. I heard 21st for some reason.
Jonathan, I think you're still on. I hope you're okay with us sharing this email.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And you can, if you've got thoughts on it, you want to get started.
Yeah, so the basics on it is if the elevator units for an individual family, all contained within one unit or to their own private garage, it doesn't have to be the full accessible unit. If it's a common use elevator, then it would have to meet the IBC requirements for Chapter 3, so that the elevator inspectors, one, can look at it and inspect it. The NISA requirements for elevator inspections do not line up with the ISO for the non-stretcher elevators. So if like my elevator inspectors go and try and do an inspection on an ISO elevator, NISA will revoke their certifications. So, and I know that was a big thing that when this legislation came around last legislative session, that was a big thing that L&I and the elevator industry spoke out about, was the ISO standards and us not being able to inspect to them.
And I remember when that came up, and and it was a very complex issue, and I certainly don't want us to get into the challenge of that. You know, to write new code that creates the conflict again. John, Sue?
Yeah, I think we discussed this, and maybe it was a single exit meeting, but my understanding is that the US standard, and I'm blanking on the number, 17.1 ASME, does have smaller elevators that are not stretcher that could be used, but the question is, do we want to do that? And maybe that, and I had asked Dustin, you know, if we're going to get anybody from L&I in one of these meetings to talk about the elevator stuff, because I think they're going to be doing a lot of these. Yeah, you know, there are a few jurisdictions, Seattle and Spokane, and I can't remember if there are others who have their own elevator inspectors, but the vast majority of these would, if you have an elevator, I think are going to get inspected by L&I.
And I made the reach out to L&I elevator program, and I did not hear back from them, so I will reestablish that tickle for them.
Okay, Richard?
And also, depending on how much we do or don't want to align with IBC requirements, stretcher elevators required in all our occupancies per the state amendment. And we've talked about that before. I would imagine that elevators would be fairly rare in these buildings. I mean, you know, you can handle accessibility requirements on the first story if you're designing this with the idea in mind that you don't want to put an elevator in. So I think in most cases, if not all cases, it would be an option that you would be choosing to provide.
Okay, John, Sue?
Yeah, just thinking about that, what Rich just said, if we assume, there will be some complications if we, and the exiting side, if we have elevators, they have to be, if the elevators are opening into the into a corridor, then you need to provide the protection and things like that appropriately, and there gets to be a little more complicated. You know, if it's true, I don't know what, maybe that's a question for Marcus and folks like that. You know, what do you imagine we're going to be seeing? Are we going to be getting elevators in these? If not, then maybe we just, you know, kind of stay silent on it and not do anything.
Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I brought it up is because if we if the requirement is you have to follow chapter 30 in the IBC, that requires the stretcher elevator. So if you require the largest elevator possible, then you won't see elevators in these buildings. You're correct. The assumption is or the ask that John also mentioned is if there are ASME 17.1 elevators that meet those standards but are smaller than the stretcher elevator, those smaller ones might be more reasonable to be able to fit into these buildings than the other types. Now, based off of the conversation we had last time this came up, it sounded like maybe even though that is an option, or even though there are ASME 17.1 elevators that are smaller than that, the IRC language currently that I was thinking you might point to is really only focused on elevators within the unit, and it's not actually allowing for common elevators, or it doesn't say anything about common elevators. So if that interpretation is correct, if that language interpretation is correct, then I think it probably is safer or simpler to, I guess, still just reference to chapter 30 of the IBC, and whatever changes happen potentially in the future to that section rules everything. But you're not trying to create something new in this appendix necessarily. If that interpretation is correct, is that's not how I was interpreting when I read it, but the last conversation, a couple of people mentioned that that's how they would interpret it. So I just want to put that out there.
Richard.
Yeah, this is probably not the time it is not the time to have a discussion about stretcher elevators and whether or not to, do something about them at the state level. But I would point out that we're talking about this because it is a state requirement, right? If this were base code, we would not be requiring a stretcher elevator in a 3-story building. So given that there's been a lot of discussion about, hey, how can we make elevators smaller? Can we get away from the stretcher sized elevator? Given that this is legislation that's driving a lot of this, perhaps somebody needs to bring that up and think about that at the state level. Again, not a discussion here, but I'll leave it at that for that reason.
Well, I wanted to get my thoughts out there. I mean, what we're saying is we can build these without elevators. So from a fire and now the words are escaping me, basically helping people if somebody has a heart attack on the 3rd floor, that was talked about. We are saying in that case, they would go down the stairs, that the firemen would take, the first responders would take those people down the stairs. If we allow an elevator, I don't think we want to exclude elevators. If we allow elevator, I don't know why we would not allow a smaller elevator and get rid of the requirement that it's stretcher. The first responders taking folks down a 3-story stair or 2 stories, I guess, of stair, and I recognize that's not easy. And if you're giving CPR, it's very difficult. But we've said that we would allow that if there isn't an elevator. So, and then I think as far as the code goes, this is a in between. We are, it's kind of, we're required to put it into the IRC, but it is kind of an IBC and, a 3-story. So I just would suggest that we wouldn't require the stretcher car, but we've got 3 minutes left. I don't know that we're going to necessarily resolve this today. I think we all need to continue to think about it. I had hoped that we could get things more resolved. I think on a lot of the egress stuff we did today. And we'll have to look at what Ken and his group comes back with on the EV charging. I know that there's, I think Patrick is going to come back with a proposal for our next meeting I think we need to drill down on the elevators, and then there's some structural requirements, although the conclusion that I came to was pretty much that we don't need to do anything specific structurally. So we can revisit those questions, and I know I have a couple of emails from folks. So those are the topics that are going to be on our agenda for the next meeting. Dustin?
Just on the elevators topic, I wanted to just offer what was going through my head, which is if we leave this appendix silent on the elevator, I believe that most jurisdictions are enforcing the base code that this is coming for. So if we are silent on this, we're going to go to R321.1 in the residential code, which just says where provided, passenger elevators, limited use and limited application elevators or private residence elevators shall comply with ASME A17.1/CSA V44. I think that if we're silent on it, we get the non-stretcher size elevator and they just install whatever's there per the standards. If we point to the IBC, then we have the stretcher elevator conundrum that we're talking about. My thought is maybe if we're concerned about the stretcher elevator being a barrier to folks putting them into these buildings, maybe we leave that portion out of the appendix, and then the base IRC would govern that, and they would just go to the ASME standard and permit through the local jurisdiction in L&I as appropriate.
Okay. Got 2 thumbs up. Well, I'm going to go ahead. It's 4 o'clock. I'm going to suggest we go ahead and close the meeting. I think that we will need to, what I almost would ask, if somebody feels strongly, put a proposal together. I think that the elevators are included somewhere in the current section. So let's, if you want to take section 106, if you feel strongly about it, sit down and write a section 106 that you think captures what you believe to be correct, and at least then we will have language that'll be that we can all talk about.
And the current draft has those 3 options that we had in that message.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I thank you, everybody. Well, I think we made really good progress on a number of fronts. Hoping that we can wrap things up, and we will see you all in a month for the single exit meeting. Okay.
Thanks, Roger.
Alrighty.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody. Take the time.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.